right, good afternoon, everyone. For the record, I'm Delegate Tony Bridges, Chair of the Public Safety and Administration Committee. Here with my colleagues, Vice Chair Proctor, Delegate Acevero, and Delegate McKay. We want to welcome you to our budget hearing today. We've got 4 agencies that we're going to hear from today. The Executive Department, the Military Department, Office of Administrative Hearings, as well as the Office of the State Prosecutor. And we've got several analysts that will provide the budget for us before we turn it over to the agencies to speak regarding their own budgets. We are going to start in this order. I think we'll do the Military Department first, followed by the Executive Department, then the Office of Administrative Hearings, and the Office of the State Prosecutor. For my colleagues, if you have any questions after the analysts go over the budget, please don't forget to raise your hand. I will call on you. You ask your question. And once we are done with the analysts and the questions that you have for the analysts, we'll then turn it over to the departments and have them give their presentations and follow that with questions as well. And so with that, if there aren't any questions, again, we're going to start with the Military Department and we'll begin with our analyst, Ms. Madeline Miller.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to share my screen now. Is everyone able to see the PDF? Great. I will be presenting the analysis of the Military Department's operating budget. The fiscal 2023 budget increases $1.5 million or 4.9% to $31.7 million, with most of the increase coming from additional federal funds in the agency's budget. Moving to an overview of agency spending. Almost 59% of the department's budget is for personnel expenses, as shown in this pie chart on page 2. The State Operations Program includes funding for the Free State Challenge Academy and the Honor Guard. It receives just over $2 million or 6.4% of the agency's total budget. The Free State Challenge Academy, or FCA, is a residential program following and a following intervention phase for 16 to 18-year-olds who have dropped out of high school or are at risk of dropping out. It will be discussed further in the key observations section of the analysis. Almost 30% of the budget supports the Army National Guard and Air National Guard. The Air National Guard tends to be more federally driven in its mission, which accounts for the difference in funding between the two programs. The administrative headquarters receives the remaining 5.2%. Exhibit 2 on page 3 shows the proposed budget and how much it grows. The general fund allowance increases by about 2.5%, and the largest increase occurs in the federal fund allowance, which grew by $1.2 million, or about 6.4% from fiscal 22. Growth in the budget comes from personnel expenses, particularly regular earnings, as well as employees' retirement system and law enforcement officer pension system, but also comes from the changes listed at the top of page 4. Preventative maintenance contracts for aging Army National Guard facilities adds $1.2 million in state and federal dollars. $400,000 in state funds were provided to leverage matching funds from the Department of Defense. Further discussion of the Army National Guard facilities can be found in the key observations section. And a major change to the fiscal 23 budget as compared to the analysis presented last year is that funds for MEMA, the Maryland Emergency Management Agency, are no longer associated with the Military Department. Chapter 287 of 2021 renamed MEMA the Maryland Department of Emergency Management, and a budget amendment processed in July 2021 transferred almost $170 million from the Military Department's fiscal 21 working appropriation. A difficult cost to identify also in the where it goes chart and in the agency's budget is that of the department's role in Maryland's pandemic response. They're both personnel costs and those which are more difficult to identify that are associated with mobilization of National Guard members. Exhibit 3 shows that about 1,700 guardsmen have been mobilized under a particular type of activation. And with troops being mobilized several times under state active duty activations and under Title 32 of the United States Code activations to assist state and local health officials. State active duty activations are at the behest of and control of the governor. Title 32 activations are also at the behest of and control of the governor. The difference comes in terms of funding. So the SAD activations are paid for with state funds and may be reimbursed by the Federal Emergency Management Agency or may not be, while T32 activations are paid up front with federal funds. The department reports that there have been 2 major T32 activations to support COVID-19 relief operations over the last 2 years, while there's been about 84% of total mobilizations in the last few years under the SAD type have been connected to the pandemic. The DLS asked that the department comment on the costs associated with the mobilization of guardsmen to assist with the state's COVID-19 response. Moving now to personnel data on page 6. This chart shows that there are no changes in the number of regular and contractual positions. However, departmental vacancies are over 2.5 times more than budgeted. The key observations begin on page 7, beginning with this chart here. Exhibit 4 shows the percentage of Air and Army facilities that are currently in fully functional status. One of the responsibilities of the military department is to build and maintain the armories and other facilities used by MDNG. As all facilities and real property support its operation and training needs. The Guard facilities have improved in recent years from 23% considered fully functional in fiscal 2016 to 37% in fiscal 21. However, this is compared to the goal of 95% functionality, and the department will be receiving $1.2 million for Army National Guard facility maintenance specifically in the allowance, and should comment on how the funds will be used. The department should also describe the impact that facility functionality has on current operations. Moving now to the second observation. This is illustrated with Exhibit 5 on page 8. It is a goal to attain 90% of the federally defined authorized troop strength for the Army and Air National Guards. Fiscal 2021 represents the first year that that goal has not been exceeded since 2008. And the department achieved 100% very recently in fiscal 2019 and 2020. In regards to fiscal 2008, at that time, heavy reliance upon the Guard for activations and extended overseas tours of duty and combat zones was cited as a reason for failing to meet the 90% goal. The difference here described in Exhibit 5 doesn't capture that there's differences between authorized troop strength for the Army National Guard and the Air National Guard. The department is asked to comment on the decline in troop strength in fiscal 2021, the extent to which the pandemic has influenced troop strength, and efforts that will be taken to reach this goal in fiscal 22 and fiscal 23. Finally, the last key observation relates to students in the Free State Challenge Academy. Last session, the military department was asked to prepare a report on the impact that the pandemic has had on the FCA. Exhibit 6 on page 9 shows the number of students in the FCA and some performance measures for the program. Typically, the FCA holds 2 classes of about 100 students. 2 are held annually. And this, however, was changed for both fiscal 21 and for fiscal 22. No classes were held in fiscal 21 with approval from the National Guard Bureau. And during fiscal 21, most FCA staff were relocated to support pandemic relief measures. The budgeted funds for the FCA were used to initiate construction on infrastructure improvements for future students and staff. DLS asks that the department comment on the status of those upgrade projects. And finally, for operations in fiscal 22, they've also been impacted by the pandemic. To assist in achieving social distancing, the department held or anticipated holding 2 classes of about 75 students, so a 25% reduction. Though the National Guard Bureau authorized the program to be fully staffed despite the decrease in the number of students. One of the department's areas of vacancies includes staff and cadre for the FCA, and we're asking that the department comment on efforts to resume classes for the Free State Challenge Academy and recruit staff for the program. The Department of Legislative Services recommends concurring with the governor's allowance. That concludes my presentation, and I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you so much, Ms. Miller, for your thorough presentation and analysis. For the members, does anyone have any questions of the analysts?
No, sir.
Okay, if not, thank you again. Definitely appreciate you giving us that thorough analysis of the military department. And with that, I am going to turn it over to Major General. Always good to see you. I know you have a number of folks here with you as well. And let us know if you also need access for a presentation.
I do not need access for presentation. I've got some prepared remarks, if you don't mind, and good to see you, Delegate. I'll continue with my prepared remarks unless you have any other questions first.
Nope.
Okay,
the floor is yours, sir.
Yep, thank you. Good afternoon. Sorry about the jets in the background. I'm on the approach path at Pax River here, so it's a sunny day, so they're flying quite a bit. So good afternoon, Chairman Bridges and members of the committee. I appreciate the opportunity to update you on the activities of the military department and respond to any issues raised and recommendations contained in the operating budget analysis prepared by Department of Legislative Services analyst Madeline Miller. Thank you, Ms. Miller, for your hard work and your presentation. I'm smart enough to always have with me lots of subject matter experts. Unless you have a question about how to fly a helicopter, I'm going to rely on some of these other guys. I've got with me Brigadier General Adam Flash. He's my director of the Joint Staff. Nate Crum, who's my Chief of Staff of the Maryland Military Department. Catherine Kelly, the Director of Legislative and Government Affairs. Dr. Andrew Yawkey, the Director of Installations. Kelly Hammond, Director of Finance. And Nick Pendell, who is my Director of Human Resources. Delegate, as you're aware, members of the Maryland Military Department are called upon to serve and protect the communities with our communities, our state, and our nation. And we are successful by making the most of the talent of the organization. We're dedicated to being inclusive and diversive, maximizing the skills and experience of our leaders and members at all levels. And we're proud of our team and continue to focus on building an exemplary, diverse team. I'd like to brag for a minute about some of the things that we've done over the past year, not the least of which is how we've assisted the state with all aspects of COVID-19 response to include security and testing at the State House, logistical support for construction, pop-up testing sites, logistical support at the Convention Center, National Guard testing support teams, mobile vaccination teams, planning support teams to assist Maryland Department of Health, food distribution missions, and PPE transportation distribution. In addition to all that, we still conduct multiple overseas contingency operations. We've had people over the last year in Afghanistan, none are there now. Kuwait, Estonia, Bosnia Herzegovina, one of our state partnership countries. Estonia is the other. Kosovo and the Horn of Africa. We also had provided security missions in Annapolis and Washington, D.C. for the presidential election and the 2021 inauguration. We continue to operate the Maryland National Guard Counter-Drug Program, supported by state and federal law enforcement agencies and seizures of illegal drugs valued at over $13 million. We continue to operate our Maryland National Guard Honor Guard. We've provided over 2,500 military funerals. MEMA, formerly a component, well, what used to be known as MEMA, formerly a component of our agency, supported, while they're still with us, the coordination and establishment of vaccine clinics, mobile vaccination clinics, booster shot testing efforts, contract tracing, and ongoing community outreach. And we've worked very closely, we continue to work very closely with MEMA to help facilitate and transition the Maryland Department of Emergency Management, what is now known as the Maryland Department of Emergency Management. And our Maryland Defense Force has assisted in COVID-19 response by providing staffing support for vaccination testing efforts at the Baltimore Veterans Administration Medical Center and Maryland National Guard, Free State Challenge Academy, and the New Shiloh Baptist Church. So that concludes my opening remarks, sir. Standing by for your specific questions.
Thank you very much. I don't have specific questions about your opening remarks, but I know that the analyst had some questions
Sure.
that she wanted you to respond to, unless any of the other members have any questions now. All right, if not, you could respond to those questions from the analyst.
Sure. The first question dealt with explaining, identifying costs associated with the mobilization of the guardsmen. That is almost entirely a federal bill. There's a little bit of state active duty up front, and that was a big issue for us to get federal funding, and that transition occurred sometime early in 2020. We've had several large-scale mobilizations, and they were almost entirely federal funding. There were some, like if we did a cyber mission, they can't be on federal funding, so we kept those guys on state active duty, and of course some snowstorms and other small scales like that. Does that answer the question of the analyst?
Does that mean that in terms of is that reimbursable, so to speak?
That goes right to, well, let's see. I'm not going to speak out of turn. I'm going to let some of my experts answer that question. Either Kelly or Nate, you want to jump in?
A little bit of feedback.
Sorry about that.
Oh, okay. Can you hear me now?
Yep, that's much better.
Sorry about that.
No problem.
So, I'm sorry. Can you repeat the question?
Yeah. So in terms of once you are doing let's say the COVID relief efforts, if that is related to a federal expense, is that cost immediately given to the federal government to reimburse the state for money spent, or I'm just interested in how that works?
So it really depends on whether we're in Title 32 status or state active duty. When we're in state active duty and the federal government takes over, and so for instance, COVID-19, there are a lot of expenses that came out of the Maryland Military Department or MEMA. Those are reimbursable expenses. Once the soldiers or guardsmen converted over to Title 32, of course, their salaries and related expenses are borne directly by the federal government. So there's no reimbursement needed there because we're not covering their salaries. The other thing is there are a lot of, even though the soldiers convert to Title 32, they're still using our facilities. Therefore, it's increasing costs relative to installations costs, water, electricity. That's not, readily apparent because it's included in our monthly operational costs that now increase due to the fact that they're using the facilities more than they otherwise would. So it's kind of a mixed bag, because while they're on Title 32 status and the federal government is footing the bill, we still have to support them and provide, places for them to stay. They stay in the armories, sometimes overnight, multiple days, weeks, months, years. It just depends. With COVID, it's been ongoing. It's been a stop and a go. There's been a couple of different related missions. So the initial COVID-19 experience, we were paying for everything on the state side. But when the president decided to declare national emergency, all of that became 100% reimbursable. So it really just depends on what the activation is.
And so is this still an ongoing activity then?
It
Where you're
is.
still trying to, account for everything that's federal versus state. And so, it's not apples and oranges, so to speak, at this point. But at some point, you can break down what is attributed to federal dollars versus, even with the in-house things that you're doing using facilities, you can attribute that to state dollars.
Correct. So, the facilities costs are going to flow through the state operating budget. So it is separated. The payroll now, anything related to COVID is flowing through the federal operating budget. So they are distinct. The one thing we just always can't determine is how much our costs have increased. We have to do, pretty harsh analysis on that to determine, okay, this time last year we spent, I don't know, $100,000 on utilities. This year we're spending $200,000. So those are the type of analysis that have not been conducted at this point.
Vice Chair Proctor.
Thank you very much. I had a quick question. What percentage of your military personnel is fully vaccinated? And for those that are not, how do you deal with the non-vaccinated personnel?
I'm going to take a swag here. I wish I had a specific number for you. It's broken down Air Force versus Army because there's two different deadlines associated with them. The Air Force set their deadline for, I think it was originally, I want to say November, and then they pushed it forward to December. And so therefore, a lot of the airmen made their decision once and for all. There's been a process for if they wanted to be considered for a exemption, and that we're in the process of that. So to answer the air side of the question, it's, I want to say in the high 90s, I think there were 14 of our 1,300 or so air guardsmen that are still trying to get an exemption from that. And then some of the airmen retired early. So it's very high 90s. On the Army side, the last number I saw, I think we are in the 60-something% range. And that's one of the reasons is because we don't have a deadline for that yet. The deadline that the Army set for us isn't until June. Now, General Flash, do you know a better number than 60-something% for the Army? I'm not sure he's out there. Shrek, you out there? Okay, I'm Madam Vice Chairman, that's pretty close to it. With those numbers rising every day, and I think it's just young folks not wanting to have to make the decision until they have to, but I think they're going to come around the same way as the Air Force eventually.
Thank you very much.
Questions on that one? Delegate Acevedo.
Actually, Mr. Chair, I'll let the department go through because I know the analysts had some questions that they wanted them to respond to, and then I'll ask my question. That's okay.
That's absolutely fine.
Thank you.
I'm
Sorry,
sorry.
you might be
I was also on mute. I'm sorry about that. If you want to move on to the next question regarding the projects.
Yes, sir. I'm going to pass this to, I think either Nate Crum or Dr. Yawkey, but it's a question about where the additional funding is going to go to with respect to the facilities. Nate?
Gotcha, sir. I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Yaw.
Okay.
Thank you, sir. We've used our increased funding support for additional preventative maintenance as part of a comprehensive effort to do facilities portfolio management, very much in line with guidance from the Department of General Services and initiatives that they're also undertaking, as well as providing guidance to other agencies. This not only helps our current facilities that are in less than ideal status, but more importantly, as we build new facilities, it allows us to sustain the equipment and systems and ensure life cycle functionality of the new buildings. As far as percentage of facilities of functional status, that currently looks at 35 of our major facilities based on National Guard Bureau metrics. And that's critically important because these buildings are our core facilities as far as readiness centers. That's where we organize our soldiers, train them, and also push them out into the community during state emergencies. To put things in perspective though, we do have 288 buildings. Now those may be basic supply, warehouses, and so forth. And I think you can appreciate they're not as nearly as complex as our readiness centers. Still critically important, but not quite as important as our readiness centers as well as our maintenance facilities. And obviously we balance this between a mix of our personnel staff, as well as calling upon outside vendors to fix some specialized systems, which in some cases electronic or IT. In other cases, some very complex heating and air conditioning systems. We also look at the time it takes to repair. Sometimes it's much more beneficial to have a vendor who has some of the most advanced equipment take care of the repair for us. Where we've shifted our efforts is to, we've had great success as far as building new facilities, but just like DGS has talked about, we've shifted to more of a life cycle management and improving the facilities that we have that aren't quite as new, as well as divesting those facilities that in no way meet our needs. Subject to any additional questions, those are my comments.
So those 35 facilities are considered the readiness centers and the maintenance facilities?
That's correct.
Yep. Gotcha. Does anybody else have any questions? All right. If not, on to the next
Okay.
question.
I think I can answer this question. I'm fairly in tune with the end strength of the both Army and Air. So Maryland National, the analyst asked that we comment on the decline in troop strength in fiscal year 2021 to the extent to which the pandemic has influenced troop strength and the efforts that will be taken for the Maryland National Guard to reach the goal. It's hard to say how much of this is pandemic related. I can tell you the Army, the big Army this year did not reach its goal. So I'm sure that whether it's pandemic related, economy related, these things have a tendency to go up and down. A lot of it has to do with how much resources we're able to apply to recruiting in terms of not just the number of recruiters, but bonuses and things like that. Here in the Maryland National Guard, Maryland Army National Guard, we've been doing really well over the past 7-8 years or so. And I think one of the things that we've done a little different, it's almost an accounting change where there were some soldiers that were on the books that weren't necessarily actually present for duty. And it's not easy for us to just eliminate them. There's a whole long process that it takes us to go through. We were able to apply some effort to actually clean that up. That said, yes, of course, recruiting was down this year. It was challenged just because of what I just talked about a second ago. So that accounts for the dip in the Army, I think. The Air National Guard, they've been on the decline, and we've had a lot of hard discussions with their recruiting team. We basically swapped out their entire recruiting team this year, and it's a little different on the air side. I think the Air National Guard, like the chief NGB Air National Guard headquarters, holds on to the funding, doesn't distribute it out to the states in the same way. So we've been able to convince them that let's change it and do it more like the Army does, and we've had some success. One of the things that we're going to do is create some storefronts, Frederick County and Hartford County, and we think that's going to have a strong increase there as well. Does that answer your question?
Are you starting to have you made those changes with the Air National Guard yet?
Yes.
Or that's something.
The storefronts are going to open this year, I think. And we are hiring recruiters. And you know, they're on the upswing. We've got better leadership. We've taken, you know, recruiting is one of those things that it's different in the National Guard than it is in any other part of the Department of Defense, because it's our own responsibility. Whereas there's like a recruiting element in big Army and big Air Force. We have to do it ourselves. So one of the things that we've done every once in a while, we have to, okay, let's take our best and brightest and put them into recruiting. It's hard to do because you want to keep your best and brightest doing, you know, your normal operations, but you know, every once in a while you got to bite the bullet. And that's what we've done in the Air Force side.
You just you know, keep us updated as to the progress.
Yes, sir. But to answer the original question, I can't say it has specifically related to the pandemic. I think more so some administrative type restrictions, and then also the economy.
Right.
Shall I move on to the next? Does anyone
Yes,
else have
sir.
questions on that?
No more. I don't think there are any more questions on
Okay,
that.
moving on to the next. Ms. Miller would like the department to comment on the status of Free State Challenge facility upgrade projects. And I think we're going to turn that back over to Mr. Yawkey for that. Sorry, Dr. Yawkey.
Yes, sir. Thank you. First of all, it's been a very collaborative effort with Department of General Services. The project has actually been approved by the Board of Public Works. That happened in January. In order to accommodate the class, in order to best utilize our plan, our comprehensive plan to repair the facility, improve it, and give it upgrades, as well as taking care of the class members, we shifted the start of the construction time frame from January 2022 until June 2022. This enables us to synchronize care, support, and training for persons participating in the challenge program, and then implementing the comprehensive repairs starting in June of 2022, when we're able to house the challenge personnel at a different facility. And the contractor and DGS are both working with us in concert as far as starting in June. And we're working with the contractor presently to fine tune the timeline as far as their completion of construction with our resumption of the next class or the follow-on class. Subject to your questions, those are my comments.
Any members have any questions? All right. If not, Major General, you can keep going to the next question.
Okay, and I think this is the last one, and I'm going to turn this over to Mr. Cromie to comment on the efforts to resume classes for Free State Challenge students and to recruit the staff for the program.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. The question again was department should comment on the efforts to resume classes for Free State Challenge students and recruit staff for the program. The Free State Challenge Academy has conducted an intake of 87 cadets for class 57 on the 11th of July, 2021. National Guard Bureau authorized class 57 size to be reduced by 25% of the normal class size to reduce issues associated with social distancing. 63 cadets of class 57 graduated Free State Academy on November 20th, 2021. Free State Class 58 was similarly reduced in size by 25%. They conduct an intake of 76 class cadets for Class 58 on the 9th of January of this year. Currently 58 cadets that are still enrolled in the program at this time. As noted in our written testimony, continuous efforts are being made to fill Free State Challenge vacancies. Those include the following. Cadre positions are posted in both job apps and Indeed in an effort to attract a large pool of qualified applicants. We're working diligently to expedite the hiring process. A virtual job fair to promote awareness of Free State Challenge Academy vacancies was held to attract applicants. These efforts so far have led to the hiring of 15 permanent and contractual cadre. And Free State Challenge has hired 21 other permanent and contractual personnel, such as counselors, in support of the program. Furthermore, Free State Challenge has not changed operations since the JCR report response in August of last year, but intends to resume operations with a class size of 100% of capacity as soon as the pandemic conditions will safely allow, and upon completion of Free State Challenge facility renovations. Renovations are expected to be completed somewhere around February of 2022 or 23. Well, any of your questions, this completes my comments.
Have any questions regarding this response? If not, I know Delegate Acevedo has another question.
Yes, appreciate that, Mr. Chair. Major General McGowan, thank you so much for that report. Appreciate your team for responding to those questions. I just have two quick questions for you. The first is, in your remarks, you mentioned that you all are working arduously, no doubt, on ensuring that the military department is diverse, inclusive, etc. And I'm curious if you could expound on that a little bit more. You know, I know General Milley, what was it, last year, was testifying before Congress talking about the importance of understanding diversity, particularly among service members, and how that plays into military readiness and understanding the communities that you serve, right? And so we just recently looked at data from the 2020 census showing not only a growth in diverse communities, you know, particularly Hispanic and Asian American communities. And I'm curious as to what you and your team are doing over at the military department to ensure that one, you're understanding and aware of that diversity and the changing face of our state, but how you're incorporating that into how you all are functioning so that, you know, really service members are ready. And when they are deployed to serve, they're able to serve in diverse communities across Maryland.
Thank you for that question, Delegate. So right now in my inbox is the charter ready for my signature for the newly established Maryland National Guard, Total Maryland National Guard Diversity Council. And we've had forever diversity councils for both the Air National Guard and the Army National Guard, but we have not until this year created one for the entire National Guard, and we've taken great efforts to do that. We have one of the premier experts that I know of. She has lots of great experience in as a federal worker. Brigadier General Janine Burkhead to give us guidance on the way to go. And she's really led the way for the diversity effort in the Army National Guard. And we're using her best practices to implement for the diversity council for the entire Maryland National Guard. So it's critically important to us. One of the things that we've discovered, we have a pretty good representation from, generally all the types of ethnic groups and male female distribution. One of the challenges we have is getting all those into the senior leader positions. And it's not because they're not being chosen, it's because a lot of times various groups or the female senior officers decide to leave the Maryland National Guard before they have the chance to get up to that level. So that's one of the things that we're trying to explore. What is it that we're having it becomes a life balance kind of thing, we believe, and how can we make that decision easier for them to stick around for. So that's one of the issues that we're trying to get after with this diversity council. Over.
Appreciate that response. I'd definitely be interested in finding out more information about this
Sure.
diversity council, who it's comprised of, and just how that fits into the broader, I guess, goal of the military department in terms of readiness. My second question, really quickly, is I think it's been 2 years now. I want to say that that Governor Hogan had ordered some testing kits from South Korea that I know the National Guard was involved in protecting, I would say, or storing or holding. Do you know where that is, or what's the deal with that? It was very pricey, and suddenly, I mean, we don't know where it is.
So I can tell you what we were involved in, and it was really only for the first couple of days. When the test kits came off the airplane, we helped to secure them and move them to a Maryland Department of Health warehouse, and helped to get them cold storage. They stayed there for a short period of time, and they were transferred over to the Maryland Department of Health. So really, we had, I guess you could say we had possession of them only because we were kind of making sure that they got transported correctly and put into cold storage. But it was shortly thereafter that they were transferred over to the Maryland Department of Health. And I'm sorry, I can't give you any more details than that. That's all I have.
Gotcha. So, so you're saying that basically the Maryland Department of Health would certainly have more information about this,
Absolutely.
considering that you all transferred it over to them.
Yeah, I mean, we really
Okay.
never it wasn't our job to really do anything with those test
Right.
kits. It was really, we worked on behalf of all the testing we did. It was always on behalf
Right.
of the Maryland Department of Health. We provide service to them.
Absolutely. I know the military department did not purchase or procure these faulty testing kits.
No.
I know that you all were just responsible for keeping an eye or guarding them. And so I was just curious because for some reason they managed to, the governor was touting them a lot, and they managed to disappear in thin air. So I was curious whether the people guarding them actually knew. But now that now that I know it's been transferred to the health department, I'll reach out to the appropriate people. But thank you, Major General, going into your team. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Delegate.
All right. Any other questions for the Major General? Seeing none, I also want to thank you, Major General, for the work that you do and your entire team and the entire military department. It's definitely appreciated, especially with the assistance that you've given regarding COVID-19. So I definitely want to give you all a shout out and just want to thank you all again for being here and presenting about your budget as well.
Well, we feel like we're members of a big team, and it's not just limited to Governor Hogan's administration, it includes the entire General Assembly. So thank you for your support.
Thank you very much. There any, I don't think there's any public comment. No one else has signed up.
That's correct. There's no one else signed up as witnesses.
All right. Well, in that case, that will end the hearing for the military department. Thank you all very much. With that, we will move on to the executive departments, boards, commissions, and offices. And I know there are going to be a number of agency representatives here, but before we get to those representatives, we'll have Ms. Norton give us the analysis of the budget.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Share my screen. Okay, there it is. Okay, the fiscal 23 budget increases approximately 880,000 to 16.8 million for the executive board commission offices in fiscal 23. There is a proposed deficiency of approximately 247 or $248,000. These appropriations will support the expenses for autism strategies, the Commission on Lesbian, Gay, Bisexual, Transgender, and Queer Affairs, and the Office of Immigrant Affairs at the Governor's Office of Community Initiatives, as well as restoration of turnover at the Governor's Coordinating Office's Shared Service Unit. The majority of the spending for fiscal 23 is directed at the Governor's Office of Community Initiatives with 61%, followed by the State Ethics Commission at 9%, and the Governor's Office of Small, Minority, and Women Business Affairs at 8%. The proposed change of 880,000 is driven mostly by an increase in personnel expenses such as turnover adjustments and reclassification and salary increases, as well as 300,000 going towards the Maryland Core Program Fund based on legislation enacted in the 2021 session mandating funding to the program, which is to provide stipends and scholarships to young adults, as well as an update to the online training and filing system for financial disclosure for state employees, and additional funding for volunteer stipends and the AmeriCorps grant. The first key observation is in relation to the minority business enterprise participation concerns. Exhibit 3 shows that the state has continuously fallen short of its MBE participation goal and is projected to do so in fiscal 23. This includes the current goal of 29% and the previous goal of 25%. There was no data for 2021 at the writing of this analysis. In June of 2021, GOSBA launched its agency MBE participation attainment survey. 60 agencies responded to the survey. Of the 60 agencies that responded, 83% have not attained the 29% goal, while 17% have. Also, of the agencies that responded, 90% of those agencies had staff attend GOSBA trainings, and 68% had staff attend the Maryland Procurement Academy trainings. In addition to the agency MBE participation attainment survey, GOSBA conducted the agency liaison survey 1. The same 60 agencies responded to this survey as well. 87% of those agencies had MBA liaison positions filled, while 13% still had vacancies. And of those liaisons, over 60% identified MBE as their secondary responsibility, compared to 37% who said it was their primary responsibility. GOSBA should be prepared to detail what steps the agency can take to increase MBE participation by state agencies. The MBE participation attainment survey report raised the idea that GOSBA should provide training to MBEs on how to start a business, register a business, and things of this nature. While GOSBA noted that this is usually the role of a business consultant, it does provide technical training classroom webinars through its website aimed at small businesses. Focus on outreach and training for MBEs and potential MBEs might help increase MBE participation. DLS recommends the adoption of committee narrative requesting that GOSBA continue the MBE participation attainment and agency liaison surveys, as well as track the participants of its free webinars and outreach events. The second key observation is in relation to the Office of Legislative Audits report on state grants. In November 2021, the Office of Legislative Audits released an audit of state grants. It was initiated after identifying various issues with the awarding of monitoring of state grants during routine fiscal compliance audits. The Governor's Grants Office role in state grants was examined as one of several executive department agencies involved in overseeing state grants. The Grants Office primarily acts as a public repository of available state grants. The audit overall had 6 findings, 3 of which were directed at the Grants Office. Audit 1, the state does not have statewide comprehensive laws or policies governing the life cycle of state grants. Finding 2, there is a lack of standardized grant applications and grant agreements. And finding 3, there is not a statewide grants management system to help administer and track grant awards. The Office of Legislative Audits recommends that the Grants Office in the Department of Budget and Management address these findings under the direction of the Maryland Efficient Grant Application Council, also known as the Mega Council, which is chaired by the Grants Office Director. The Grants Office has agreed to the audit's findings and recommendation and plans to incorporate the recommendations into the Mega Council's final report due July 2024. The Grants Office is currently addressing finding 3, the need for a grants management system. $10.5 million has been appropriated for the Grants Office Enterprise Grants Management Solutions. They had chosen a vendor, but the contract was not approved by the Board of Public Works based on an objection to the procurement process. The Grants Office should be prepared to brief the Budget Committee on the status of the Information Technology EGMS project and how it will address the concerns raised by the audit. The final key observation is related to the Maryland State Commission on Criminal Sentencing Policy Guidelines and Racial Biases. The Commission is updating the sentencing guidelines for specific cell ranges of the existing sentencing matrix for drug offenses and the sentencing matrix for property offenses. The Commission has approved the amendments and guidelines should take effect July 1st, 2022. The guidelines are updated to keep up with sentencing trends, and this practice allows the Commission to revise sentencing guidelines to align with current judicial practices. However, presently there is no consideration if sentencing trends reinforce racial biases in sentencing. And with Maryland's sentence population being 72% Black, despite Blacks only composing 29.5% of the state's population, the issue is worth exploring. The Commission should discuss how it can address this concern with sentencing guidelines in the future, and DLS recommends a report detailing a plan to study the extent to which racial bias is present in state sentencing. In summation, there are 3 recommended actions. 1, a committee narrative requesting a report on GOSBA's training and outreach events. 2, a committee narrative requesting the continuance of the MBE participation attainment and agency liaison surveys. And 3, a committee narrative requesting a plan for studying racial biases in sentencing. That concludes my presentation, and I'm glad to take any questions.
Great, thank you very much, Ms. Norton. Do the members have any questions of the analysts? I do have one question. I know when you were talking about the MBE program, there were 17%, I think, of the agencies that actually reached their MBE. I believe it was reached their MBE goals, if I'm not mistaken. Yes. Do you know what agencies they were? If not, I can also ask the agency.
Yes, I believe I have that. Okay, that would be Juvenile Services, Aviation Administration, Information Technology, Education, Environment, Stadium Authority, MBA, Environmental Services, Health Benefit Exchange, and the Subsequent Injury Fund.
Thank you so very much.
Mm-hmm.
Does anyone else have any questions? All right, thank you very much. If not, we will turn it over to our agency representatives. I know we have a number of them here, including my friend, Executive Director Steve McAdams from the Governor's Office of Community Initiatives. Always good to see you, sir. I'm delegating you as the official spokesperson to hand it over to the rest of the agency representatives. And so I'll allow you to go first and hand it off to whoever you need to go next.
Okay, well, first I'd like to say congratulations to you and on being chair, and thank you for all you do for the community and keeping your door open for us. And at this time, I'd like to introduce you to Patrick Lally, who runs the governor's coordinating office.
Good afternoon, Chairman Bridges and members of the subcommittee. My name is Patrick Lally, and I'm the Senior Executive Director of the Governor's Coordinating Office's Shared Services. Thank you for your consideration this afternoon as we testify on the proposed budget for boards, commissions, and offices. I'm joined by all those representing boards, commissions, and offices this afternoon. And Mr. Chairman, with your concurrence, may I introduce those that are here present with me and those that are participating virtually?
Absolutely.
Thank you very much. So with me here are the inimitable Steve McAdams. As you know, he is the Executive Director of the Governor's Office of Community Initiatives. Also with me is Special Secretary Jimmy Rhee, who is with the Governor's Office of Small and Minority and Women Business Affairs. And also with me, if you can scoot over, Jen, is Jennifer Colton, who is the Director of the Governor's Grants Office. Here for your view. Thank you. And then participating virtually are Jennifer Allgare, the Executive Director of the Maryland State Ethics Commission. Harry Chase, Executive Director of the Healthcare Alternative Disputes Resolution Office.
For my 28th year.
You know, I knew that you would have the opportunity to make sure that everyone knew that.
Thank you.
Thanks, Harry. David Soule, who's the Executive Director of the Maryland State Commission on Criminal Sentencing Policy. Erica Snipes, the Executive Director of the State Labor Relations Boards. And Bethany Brinkley, Chairwoman of the State Board of Contract Appeals. Thank you, everyone. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to thank our analyst, Ms. Kelly Norton, for her hard work and for her acknowledgement of all of our efforts throughout this analysis. She is all here concur that she has been a delight to work with. So thank you. I'm happy to tell you that the analyst has concluded that the boards, commissions, and offices have put forth another responsible spending plan for fiscal year 2023 by instituting various cost-saving measures. The governor believes that it is important that boards, commissions, and offices, that their spending plan reflect the same fiscal responsibility he expects all other state agencies to implement. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I would like to make an official comment that we are in support of the analyst's recommendation to concur with the governor's allowance for our offices. Also, just to note, our offices have provided written testimony for your review, and my colleagues are present to respond to any questions that you may have. If you prefer to wait until my colleagues have made their remarks, with your concurrence, I'll then turn it over to Special Secretary Rhee.
Absolutely, Mr. Rhee.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. Mr. Chairman and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to speak today. There were several items mentioned in the analysis regarding NBE participation and GOES-BUZZ roles, so I will address them in the order presented. You asked that GOES-BUZZ be prepared to detail what steps the agency can take to increase NBE participation by state agencies. Our role, GOES-BUZZ role as an oversight agency, is limited to data collection, education and training, and advocacy. The process concerning contract by contract determination regarding NBE inclusion occurs at the agency level. Beyond collecting, analyzing, and reporting NBE participation or performance data, GOES-BUZZ creates NBE programs framework, policies, and processes for goal setting and application. Now, we are confident in the sufficiency of the existing NBE relevant statutes and policies. GOES-BUZZ is not positioned to provide a step-by-step process to increase NBE participation by state agencies since the goal-setting function is an independent responsibility performed during the procurement process. Guidelines on that activity already exist. Currently, BPW Advisory 2001-1, Procurement Review Group, SPR designation, and NBE and VSBE determination That guideline instructs agencies on the process for determining socioeconomic preference and provides the structure for maximizing MBE goals and sub-goals on a contract by contract basis. The MBE program success is dependent upon each agency's level of implementation and enforcement. So let me firstly put implementation of the MBE program is a decentralized process. Improvement should happen at the fundamental level across the agency's MBE input, process, and output workflows. A chart outlining responsibilities along with our recommendations has been provided in our written response to you all. Our primary recommendation are to increase transparency through better goal-setting tools, improve MBE compliance at the contract level, and increase enforcement and accountability of MBE goals at the agency level. The day-to-day work involved at each level of the MBE workflow is robust and voluminous. GOSBA's current MBE's compliance staff, which is comprised of two managers, is not positioned to participate in the daily procurement activities of the 70 participating agencies. Now, in addition, the Department of Legislative Services, DLS, recommends the adoption of committee narrative requesting that GOSBA continue to conduct and report the findings of the MBE participation and the liaison attainment surveys in order to monitor the state's progress toward achieving its MBE goals. In addition, GOSBA should track the participants of its free webinars and outreach events throughout the fiscal 2022 and 2023 and report the data to the committees. Now, we concur with that recommendation from DLS. We will continue to report findings of the MBE participation and liaison attainment surveys. In addition, we will track and report the participation of our free webinars and outreach events through fiscal 2022 and 2023. So I will be happy to respond to any questions that you may have. I want to thank you, and my colleague, Jan Corton, will respond to the next item.
Moving on to the next item, Mr. Secretary, thank you for your response to that analysis as well. I know there may be some other questions, but in terms, help me understand with the agencies. There is no MBA liaison that's assigned for each agency. However, I believe there were 17 vacancies within agencies that have MBE liaisons. Do you track the vacancies of those liaisons? Because I would assume that those liaisons would give or help report that information to you about what's going on with their agencies. So I'm hoping that there's no lag in reporting information about MBE participation based on that vacancy. I would assume that each agency still, even if they don't have a liaison, have MBE participation embedded in some position within the agency. But I think that MBE liaison is really critical if we're going to be serious about hitting our goals in MBE participation. And so I guess the question is, one, are you tracking which liaisons are currently vacant? And do you have a role in helping or making sure that they fill those vacancies in a timely manner?
That's a great question, Chairman. And we do not have a role as far as whether they hire a liaison or not, but we do advise them to have a liaison because statute requires the liaison to be a high-level officer, the direct chain of commanding and communication to the secretaries or directors of each agency and department, okay? We preach that, we promulgate that constantly. However, we do not have any oversight as far as whether they are hired and so on. And I understand that many agencies suffer from the turnover rate from the liaison's position, right? It's a very stressful job, and I get that. And I think this is an area that we really need to look into very carefully as to why there's such a high turnover in a particular spot. And also, I think it's very important that all the assessments and judgments and evaluations of the MBE program be looked within that systems view that I provided to you, right? At the earliest inception, when the MBE program or should be or should not be included, right? And at the process level, what contract is being, implemented, right? There's a monitoring and oversight there. And then very at the output, when contract is done, there's performance data and reports to be done, right? MB's role on those three areas are critical, okay? So when the liaison is missing, obviously that leaves a huge vacancy there that really needs to be looked at, right?
I totally agree. I know we've got a number of vacancies in all state agencies, really, that we really need to get a handle on trying to fill those vacancies. So I will turn this over to the Vice Chair, Delegate Proctor. I know you have a question as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm addressing this to the panelists. We saw data recently that indicated that African-American employees still receive much lower salaries than their white counterparts. And I'd like for you to address that issue across your agencies. Tell me about the percentages and what is being done to end this disparity.
Vice Chair, I could start. I am the executive director of the governor's coordinating offices. So I oversee 7 component offices, including the governor's office of community initiatives, small minority and women business affairs. I could go through the whole list for you, but there are about 142 employees here at our offices in Crownsville. And from the day that I started my job, we've endeavored to take a look at salary parity on all levels. And although I don't have percentages for you, and I can get them for you for sure, we've made every effort to ensure that irrespective of race, ethnicity, and gender, our employees have achieved parity in their salaries.
Well, I would appreciate it if you would get me those percentages. I think that's important for us to be able to document whether any improvement is being made.
Absolutely. I don't know whether any of my other colleagues have a response for you at this time, but please.
If not, I would ask that if you all could provide us with that information. I think that would be really helpful for this committee.
Yes, Chairman.
Vice Chair, did you have any follow-up questions?
No, that's it. Thank you. We will look forward to getting that information. Thank you.
Delegate Osmera.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you to the panel. My question, I just want to bring it back to MB participation. It might just be me, but I'm having difficulty understanding, I guess, where we need to go to ensure that we're increasing MB participation. I think this is what year 3 that I have asked both the governor's office folks that are here, but also the secretary of DGS about MBE participation. And what I'm having difficulty understanding is how Washington, DC, neighboring jurisdiction that is not a state, is able to not just meet, but exceed their MBE participation on contracts. And I would argue, having looked at it, that they have an even more stringent requirements for contractors as far as MBE participation, but also who they're hiring on these actual jobs, whether they're DC residents or not. And so I guess at this point, what I'm curious to find out is, does this require legislative action? I'm hearing vacancies in various positions. I'm hearing there's one person who's responsible for MBE. I'm hearing that, some agencies don't necessarily have an MBE liaison. And so we recognize all these challenges, but to me, every single year that we keep coming back and acknowledging these challenges, this is every year that millions of potential, millions of dollars in potential contracts that MBEs across the state could have been participating in. So I guess at this point, is it really an agency thing, or is it something that we need to take legislative action? Is it a funding thing where, we're not funding enough of these positions, and whatever vacancies we have, the salaries are not competitive or comparable to these kind of positions in other agencies? What I'm trying to avoid, I guess, is us coming back next year and the following year not meeting MBE participation goals when the District of Columbia is doing it, and they're literally across the way. And I would probably argue that Virginia is a little bit better than us. But I say that to say, how do we not have this conversation next year and the following year? Does it require legislative action? Does it require us working with the governor, these agencies? How are we not meeting MBE participation?
That's a great question. And although it's a loaded question, it's a very simple question. Okay. Number one, concerning the comparison of other states, SWAM with Virginia and so on, we are completely different. Okay. In all honesty, as much problem that we have with MBE, we are still the gold standard among all such socioeconomic programs in the country, right? Other states do emulate us. However, as I have been in discussions and conversations with many of Black Caucus members, you are only missing two things. We don't need more laws, okay? We don't need more statutes, regulations. They're already there, thousands of them, okay? It just complicates the things, right? I come from my personal experience as a government contractor, small business, and so on, right? What's missing are just two things. If you really look at those MBE programs in three systems view, input, whether contracts are determined, whether MBE is included or not, what is missing right now is we have some transparency there. I don't see that, okay? I don't get involved with that, right? Nobody does, right? Each agency does its own thing, right? So I've always, the advocate on behalf of transparency, right? Number one. And two, in the implementation stage, where the contracts are being, worked on, we don't have any contract management system across all agencies, okay? There are only like 4 or 5 states in the whole country with contract administration. But unless you have that system at each of the agencies, how do you know how much work is being done? How do you know when prime does not pay sub, whether that's a justifiable non-payment or it isn't, okay? We don't know that, right? That's the second thing. The third part is at the very end, and this is where you and I always talk about is, okay, you didn't meet the goal. So I'm gonna look and wait until next year. It's been like that for 40 years, okay, delegate, because there's no accountability, right? You only need transparency at the beginning and accountability at the end for my office. And for the agencies, some sort of a contract management tool in the middle, right? All those three things are missing. So all our good intent, that it's not being implemented because of that, okay? And I've been preaching this for 7 years now. And because of the COVID, finally, the delegates are looking into this with in-depth understanding of what really is going on in the MBE program. Those three things are missing. With those three things, we have the best program one can concoct, all right? And when you look at a Virginia program, delegate, but we have, we got 2 different programs. MBE is about race and gender based. Small Business Reserve, SBR, is race, gender, is not based on that, right? Virginia's program is combination of both MBE and SBR, so it's not even like ours, okay? So it's a very different program, yeah.
Gotcha, appreciate that. Well, I guess looking forward to working with you on that, and what it sounds like is that you agree with the analyst recommendation. So hopefully we can get some improvement in that space. All right, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Delegate. Are there any other questions for the Special Secretary? Thank you very much. If not, let's move on to the question about the Governor's Grants Office and the status on the IT project.
Yes, thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the subcommittee. My name is Jennifer Holt. I'm the director of the Governor's Grants Office. Thank you for the opportunity to address the committee today. As you know, I submitted written testimony, and as you suggested, would like to touch base on the Enterprise Grants Management System, otherwise referred to as EGMS. We strongly believe that with the implementation of the EGMS, Maryland will not only eliminate cumbersome, duplicative systems, but expand its portfolio of grant revenue, improve compliance, increase program performance, and establish clear, uniform standards, forms, applications, and agreements, which are to the benefit of all state agencies, applicants, and recipients. The project goals and objectives directly align and respond to the various challenges and recommendations made by the OLA performance audit of state grants, as well as observations and recommendations provided by the Maryland Efficient Grant Application Council, or otherwise the Mega Council, in their year-end report that we submitted to the General Assembly December of 2021. So we have been, we've started the progress reporting on that. I know our analysts mentioned the final report for 24, but we've already begun reporting on that progress, those observations and recommendations. So as you know, the Procurement Evaluation Committee for the EGMS project had recommended a vendor for the award, but that item was not approved by the BPW in the BPW meetings at the end of December. Members did cite concerns with the procurement process, but offered a very strong endorsement for the overall need for the project. So there was no, kind of contestment of the need for the project. The Governor's Grants Office is working with the Office of State Procurement on an update and re-release of the RFP. The procurement officer has been assigned to our project, and our project team continues to work in preparation of the implementation. As often is the case with procurements, we are unable to predict when this project will come back to the BPW, since there are many factors kind of outside of our control through the procurement process. But in the meantime, our office is working on behalf of the Mega Council and through the EGMS project team, and we will continue those efforts to prepare for that potential implementation. And in our written testimony, a link to the Mega Council's report and the OLA audit was provided and can be found on our website at grants.maryland.gov. The GGO Mega Council will continue to work with OSP, DBM, and DO-IT in pursuit of resolution to the challenges noted in both of those reports. I'm happy to take any questions from yourself or the committee.
Thank you very much. With that, the project, though, it sounds like we still are just unsure of when it will go back to the Board of Public Works to, we just don't know at this point.
Yeah, well, technically, I mean, I have a meeting with OSP, our new procurement officer, next week. She has been kind of going over and coordinating all the feedback that we provided. So based on last year's procurement, the questions that came in from the vendors, the interaction with the review committee, and just, relevant kind of updates that could be made based on the progress of the project team and what the work we've done over the past year and a half. Those things are going to be kind of streamlined and tightened up, if you will, in the new RFP. So she's working on that. We have a meeting next week to touch base on the progress. It'll go through various, reviews, and then it'll hit the street again. We will be shooting to condense as many kind of review timelines and what have you. Everyone that's on our side is teed up and ready to go So as soon as we can kick this off, we're ready to kind of move the process forward. We just kind of need to get out of the gate with procurement at this point.
Is this sort of a restart of the original?
Technically,
RFP?
it is. There was nothing really wrong with what we were asking for. We had competitive responses from vendors. We had, competition. We had, the technology that we were seeking was there, it's available, and the costs associated with our kind of estimates were aligned with what was provided. So I think, and not to get into like the actual procurement challenges or processes or what the board kind of referred to, we are in a good place as far as the field of play, as far as the vendors are concerned. We anticipate that we're going to have good competition again, and that folks are ready to reapply or resubmit their proposals as soon as this is released. So I don't see, any real challenges aside from, our procurement officer kind of spending the time to get this all packaged up and ready to hit the street again.
But once it is in place, it'll help address some of the issues raised in the audit, or all of it.
We think that I think that, yes, if we would have gotten this going a couple of years ago, we would have been resolving many of these things in front of you today. But we are very confident that with the implementation of the system, that it will naturally resolve many of these things and address some areas of concern that, the nonprofit community has, that our constituents are facing as applicants, because there's a whole, side of this that's not captured in the OLA audit. So, please take a look at the report that the Mega Council submitted. And I'm happy to, kind of address anything, offline if you feel that you need more elaboration.
Looking forward to the project getting started.
Thank you.
Any other questions from any of the other members? All right. If not, thank you very much.
Thank you, Chairman and Subcommittee. I will kick it to my colleague, David Soleil. He will address the next item.
Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the subcommittee. My name is David Soleil. I am the Executive Director of the Maryland State Commission on Criminal Sentencing Policy, or the MSCCSP, or Sentencing Commission for short. I thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today. I also want to take an opportunity to thank Ms. Kelly Norton for her work on the analysis, and also Mr. Ken Weaver for helping myself and a few other representatives from boards and commissions and offices unit to sign up so we could participate in today's hearing. The Sentencing Commission provided written testimony in advance, and my comments today will focus on addressing the concern that was outlined on page 11 of the analysis regarding sentencing guidelines and racial disparities. I want to note that the Sentencing Commission is already engaged in the study of racial disparities at sentencing. An analysis of offender and offense score characteristics by race and ethnicity and gender was presented to our Sentencing Commission for its review at a December 2021 meeting. Further, those analyses were also presented to the Judiciary's Equal Justice Committee Sentencing Subcommittee just a few weeks ago. Accordingly, the Sentencing Commission concurs with the analyst's recommendation. The Sentencing Commission is encouraged that the Department of Legislative Services shares the same concerns, and we are certainly willing to share the results of the analyses that I discuss and to include additional analyses that were already planned via report as requested by July 15th of 2022. To that end, I am happy to respond to any questions that the committee may have.
Thank you very much. And we have a question from Delegate Acevedo.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess in some respects, Mr. Soleil answered my question, because I was curious as to when that report would be made available to members of the General Assembly. Mr. Soleil, I appreciate your work. I guess what I'm confused about is, so there was a justice policy study that was done that recently, that was shared with members of the Judiciary and Judicial Proceedings Committee, that in essence said that Maryland incarcerates more Black people between the ages of 18 and 35 than any other state in the union. And that has been the case for the past 10 years, right, under Republican as well as Democratic governors. And so I understand the need to examine this data and to want to put that out. My understanding is that data has also been put out on this in previous years. I guess what I'm trying to find out is, how do we get out of this gathering, which I recognize is important, but this continuous gathering of information that doesn't seem to lead to any action, while we still have this very troubling data where we incarcerate more Black people, right, between ages 18 and 35 than any other state in the union, when we're higher than Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, no place where we even want to be on any indicator, if you ask me. But how is it that we are still in this gathering data phase and not in a what are the policy recommendations, so that we're in essence dealing with the issue of mass incarceration here. The legislature has passed a number of bills to deal with recidivism and incarceration, as I'm sure you're well aware, but that doesn't appear to have much of a dent on what we're seeing. So can you just expound on that a little bit, and what it is that you all are going to be doing other than just releasing data? I mean, data is readily available to us, and I'm not saying that we don't want it. I'm not saying it's not important to this conversation. Right. It informs this dialogue, but to what point do we stop getting data and we start getting policy recommendations to take Maryland from this very embarrassing rank that we're in of incarcerating more Black people between ages of 18 and 35? I'm very curious in knowing more about that.
I appreciate it. Thank you, David. I appreciate your question, and it's a very good question. The answer is not easy. There are a multitude of factors, obviously, that impact whether one is incarcerated. From our aspect, criminal sentencing, which we're involved with, is just one of those components. When you consider disparities in the racial composition of the prison population, you have to consider, whether there's disparities being made at the level of judicial discretion at sentencing, or if those disparities are happening in other parts of the criminal justice process. And I think, as you probably can rightfully expect and understand, what we know is that there's other aspects of the sentencing that happen way before sentencing that strongly contribute to whether one is incarcerated or not. And for instance, just as an example, I reference a 2020 study that was done out of the Harvard University Law School that identified that disparities at sentencing were largely attributed. They put a number on it, up to 70% were distributed to the type and severity of the initial charge, the charging decisions made by prosecutors that really are impacting those. So I'm saying all that because the point I'm trying to get to, I think, is to address your specific question: is at what point are there policies that change what we're seeing in terms of what's happening in our state? And I think that as you noted, there are several good policy implications that have come out related to the Justice Reinvestment Act that encourage the use of alternatives to incarceration. And that is something that the Sentencing Commission did deliberately work with, did make a policy change in terms of changing guidelines rules to say that those type of sentences are considered compliant with the sentencing guidelines. There are things that the commission is currently looking at in terms of really with respect to the sentencing guidelines. We are examining how one's offender score is calculated. That's how the calculations that go into the determination in the guidelines about a prior record. And we're currently analyzing the data to consider whether a policy change would come out of that to diminish the effect or impact that relatively minor misdemeanors, offenses like marijuana possession and disorderly conduct, disturbing the peace, trespassing. Commission is currently looking at that and
considering a policy that would potentially reduce the impact of those on the guidelines. So someone's recommended guidelines range would be potentially reduced if that policy changed. The other thing that we want to look at is the application of points for when there's a score in the guidelines that considers whether a individual utilized a weapon during the commission of the offense. And the commission did observe disparities in terms of the application of those points, where Black defendants were significantly more likely to receive points for weapon presence than white defendants. And so that is something that the commission is going to examine, how those points are applied, and potentially have a policy change that would come out of that. So I really can only speak to the policy changes that the Sentencing Commission and the sentencing guidelines can impact. And so I wanted to give you some examples of policies that the Sentencing Commission has implemented. But I definitely understand and appreciate your question, because I think that we're hopeful that other policy changes that have been made, especially coming out of justice reinvestment related to revocations for technical violations. When the JRA report came out, we know that a significant portion of the prison population was being driven by people that were being returned to prison for probation violations. And the judiciary, there was guidelines that were just recently implemented for how to handle technical violations, with specific caps on how many days people can be resentenced for that. So I think there are some policy changes that potentially have a significant impact, and that hopefully we'll start to see some of that, the effect of those changes here soon. Yeah, I appreciate that, Mr. Chair. Just one quick, I'll be quick. Thank you. Get you a chair like mine. But I appreciate that, Mr. Sule, and I agree with you. I think there's a lot that goes into sentencing. I just find it troubling that Maryland has the highest population of Black people outside of the Deep South. We account for 30% of the state's population and 70% of the state's prison population. And I don't think, and I refuse to believe, that has anything to do or the suggestion that any one particular group is more criminal than the other. I think that's a recognition of the fact that there's a lot of laws on the books that do criminalize people that we need to get off, but there are also policies that we need to really address. You mentioned a good bit of policy recommendations, and I appreciate that. One thing I didn't hear that I think is very much related to this conversation is mandatory minimum sentences and the role that plays in sort of driving incarceration. I know Governor Hogan has been a big proponent of mandatory minimum sentences that we've heard from judges, ties their hands, contributes to mass incarceration, and doesn't get us any closer to where it is that we want to be. So I'm curious, Mr. Sule, whether mandatory minimum sentences is something that the commission is looking at as it relates to our prison population. When you talk about the suite of policy recommendations that you all are looking at right now, is there any discussion or is there any movement in that space? Yeah, that's an excellent question. So the commission does not take a position on legislation that unless it directly affects the sentencing guidelines and the operations of the Sentencing Commission. I will say that we are studying the observed differences that we've noted, and I think you're exactly right on point, because the mandatory minimums for particularly for some weapon offenses are disproportionately applied for African-American defendants, and we've observed that from the data that we collect. So I think you're right on point on that, and that is something that does need to be assessed further, but it's not expecting the commission to get involved in the legislative role regarding statutes that have mandatory minimums. Yeah, no, absolutely get that. I'm not asking you to take a policy position, but I just think the data is very, very damning, right? And we know that when we talk about the crime bill from, was it the 80s or 90s, right? Right. It was mandatory minimum sentences that got us to the place where we have a larger prison population than the very countries that we're criticizing for human rights violations. But anyways, I appreciate that, and I look forward to those policy recommendations from the commission. Thank you, Mr. Sule, and thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
No problem. Thank you, Delegate Acevedo. I don't mind letting you speak because when you speak, you sort of jog questions from other members as well. And so while you were talking, I see the Vice Chair raised her hand as well. Delegate Proctor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a quick question. I think there might be a quick answer. You referenced the number of probation violations that occur. And we keep hearing that if the parole office was fully staffed, we would see a significant decrease in the probation violations. How can you address that for me?
Well, good afternoon, Delegate Proctor. Unfortunately, I can't address that question for you. That is not an issue that the Sentencing Commission is involved in. We don't collect the data on parole violations. I was just kind of trying to speak to the general processes overall. So unfortunately, I can't directly address that question because I'm not involved in that aspect.
Well, maybe there's someone else that could give us that later. Thank you.
Vice Chair. I don't believe the members have any other questions. If
Mr. Chair?
not, yes.
If there are no other questions, may I conclude our testimony?
Absolutely. No other questions. Floor is
Thanks.
yours.
Yeah, thank you very much. With that, just ensuring that there are no further questions, I'd like to note officially that we concur with the 3 operating budget recommended actions on page 12 and to adopt the committee narrative. And with that, and with your concurrence, we conclude our testimony.
I thank you very much. As I mentioned earlier, there are no other questions. And so I just want to thank you all for your time today and your thoughtful responses to all of our questions. We appreciate you being here, and thank you for giving us the information that the analyst asked you for. Definitely appreciate it and look forward to working with you in the future.
On behalf of us all, we thank you for your consideration.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. That will end the budget hearing for
Actually, Mr.
Executive
Chair, I believe
Department.
we have one witness, Michael
We do have.
Carnahan.
All right. My apologies.
So sorry.
Is this person on?
Good afternoon, Mr.
there you go.
Chairman. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I apologize. I'm simply the clerk of the Maryland State Board of Contract Appeals and was asked to just be here in case there was a question that needed to be referenced to me. So I apologize if for any misunderstanding.
No misunderstanding at all. I definitely appreciate you being here to answer any clarifying questions we might have had.
My pleasure, sir. Have a great day.
Thank you. You do the same.
Thank you.
So now that officially ends the hearing for executive departments, boards, and commissions. We will now move on to the Office of Administrative Hearings, and we will begin with our budget analyst, Mr. Caleb Weiss.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to go ahead and share the presentation here on the screen. Okay. Can everyone see the screen? With that, for the Office of Administrative Hearings, starting here with the operating budget summary, the fiscal 2023 allowance increases the budget by $225,000 or 1.4%, which brings the total budget to $16.8 million. Moving on, before we get to the details of the fiscal 2023 allowance, there is a fiscal 2022 deficiency appropriation. The Department of Housing and Community Development was supposed to pay the Department of the Office of Administrative Hearings for mortgage foreclosure mediations that took place during fiscal 2019. However, due to the COVID-19 foreclosure moratorium and other COVID-related expenses, the Department of Housing and Community Development did not have these funds, and therefore Administrative Hearings was asked to cancel the 2 outstanding encumbrances for these reimbursable funds. A proposed fiscal 2022 deficiency appropriation provides the reimbursement of these funds for the Office of Administrative Hearings. And with that, we'll move on to the fiscal 2023 allowance. As you can see here, 84% of the allowance constitutes personnel expenditures. This is similar to prior years. The next two largest areas of expenses are rent at 6% and office, computer, and other expenses at 6% as well. Moving on to the where it goes chart and the changes. I'll note here in the personnel line, there were two priorly abolished positions the funding is being restored in this budget. The positions themselves are slated to be restored in a future supplemental budget. And then you have the rest of the personnel adjustments below that. One non-personnel expense that I'd like to point out is the funding for the e-file system. This is a new IT project that will bring the Office of Administrative Hearings into line with many of the other judicial agencies which have already implemented e-filing systems. Moving on to the personnel information. Here, as you can see, there are no changes in personnel in the fiscal 2023 allowance. As I noted before, there are the two abolished positions that are the funding is being restored, and those positions, the PINs themselves, will be restored in a future supplemental budget. Here in Exhibit 3, we have the hearings by agency. As you can see, the Maryland Department of Health, or MDH, and the Motor Vehicle Administration, MVA, comprise the two largest areas of hearings at 44% and 39% respectively. After that, you have the other agencies over here as well. In Exhibit 4, we have the total cases by agency. As you can see here, for Motor Vehicle Administration, there's been a general decline in cases since 2013, while many of the others have remained roughly level, though foreclosures have also declined as well. Here we see the processing times by case processing times by fiscal year. And as you can see, starting in fiscal 2021, you see a dramatic rise in all of the types of cases, with the exception of the Department of Health cases, which have remained relatively stable. Of particular note is the foreclosure mediation cases, which is this light blue line here, which have increased dramatically in fiscal 2021. We asked that Office of Administrative Hearings should comment on the accessibility of virtual hearings and actions that are being taken to ensure that all Marylanders have access to these virtual hearings. Moving forward, we have the hearing satisfaction rates along three different measures here. As you can see, the preparedness and organization is the green, and then we have fairness of the outcome, which is the purple, and then we have the outcome itself as the blue. All three of these measures have declined in 2021, fiscal 2021. And because of that, we asked that Office of Administrative Hearings should comment on the decline in all three of these measures and the actions that are being taken to address these declining satisfaction rates. And with that, DLS recommends concurring with the governor's allowance. And that's the end of my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so very much, Mr. Weiss. Do any of the members have a question for the analyst? Seeing none, I think we can move on to Chief Pott. Chief, the floor is yours. I know you have a number of members from your team as well. If you want to introduce them, and if you want to share your screen as well, just let us know.
Unmute.
Yep, still on mute. There you go.
Thank you. I'm Chief Administrative Law Judge Chung Park, the Office of Administrative Hearings. This is my first budget hearing, and it has been an honor to serve the State of Maryland's third Chief Administrative Law Judge since July 1, 2020.
Well, congratulations and welcome.
Thank you. Also with me are OAH's Director of Finance and Administration, Denetta Harvell, Director and Deputy Directors of Operation, John Radick and Trish Delph, and Director and Deputy Director of Quality Assurance, Harriet Hartman and Latonia Dargan. And finally, IT Director, Taq Ibrahim. Congratulations, Delegate Breeze, on your chairmanship. It is a pleasure to meet you, Vice Chair Delegate Proctor and Delegates Acevedo and McKay. I would like to thank OAH's new legislative analyst, Kelly Wise, for his thorough analysis. Kelly came to our Hunt Valley headquarters in the summer to receive an overview of our agency and meet members of OAH's management staff. I appreciate the time that he took to learn about our agency and important work that we do. OAH's entire workforce has been extremely agile and forward-thinking in past 2 years during the period of disruption and uncertainty. And I am proud to report that there is no backlog of cases awaiting hearing because of OAH's ability to pivot to remote hearings. OAH remains vigilant of its statutorily defined role to provide flexible due process to the citizens of Maryland and has worked tirelessly to provide fair and impartial hearings to people of Maryland who are affected by actions of many Maryland state agencies in a safe, efficient, and timely manner. Accessibility and efficiency of OAH will remain strong as it continues to ensure diligent due process for all Marylanders. OAH will continue to embrace and improve technology and appreciate the funding for the much needed e-filing system so that it can enhance OAH's efficiency and accessibility to the public. Thus, OAH concur with the governor's allowance. I believe you all have OAH's pre-filed testimony, and I and members of my management team are here and happy to answer any questions committee members might have.
Great. Thank you very much. I know that the analyst did ask about the accessibility of virtual hearings and the actions being taken to ensure that Marylanders have access. Can someone comment on that?
Yes, we have submitted the response to that request, and it can be further elaborated by our Director of Operation, John Radick. John?
Yes, thank you, Chief. So, access has been a primary concern of ours ever since COVID hit. It's been almost 2 years since the governor declared a state of emergency. That was February 28th for us. And we did go quickly into action. We shifted to virtual hearings. So we conduct about 85 to 90% of our hearings now virtually. And that means 3 different types of platforms. Telephone, which we always did, video, and video has 2 different platforms, Google Meet and WebEx. So for example, all of our motor vehicle administration hearings are done by WebEx. And this has been a remarkable success story for us because everybody seems to like it. The people who are licensees no longer have to drive to the MVA branches. Their counsel doesn't have to spend time away from their office. And our judges don't have to drive all around the state. So the state is in fact saving a lot of money on that in transportation costs. Now with other departments, we've also shifted to virtual platforms with Maryland Department of Health and Department of Human Services. We've actually gone back and forth because COVID threw a couple curveballs our way. Initially, we went to either telephone or Google Meet for those hearings. Those are things like food stamps, temporary cash assistance, Maryland Department of Health hearings where someone wants services perhaps in their home to keep someone out of an institution. So we went to telephone hearings and also Google hearings in a certain few counties. And then when things seemed to look better on the horizon with COVID, we went back to in-person hearings, but recently because of Delta and Omicron, we find ourselves back doing the virtual hearings. They do work, but we do have concerns about access for people that don't have computer skills. So if you don't, we make computers available to you at our office in Hunt Valley and in Rockville. We have special hearing rooms set up that can even accommodate what we call a hybrid hearing. So for example, someone will be here at the office appearing in person in front of the judge, and the person who can't make it to the office can appear on a screen. So we've been, as I think our chief said, very flexible and nimble in my approximation to get everybody the hearing that they deserve and deliver that flexible due process to the citizens of the state of Maryland. I don't think this is the end of the story. I think with MVA, like I said, that's our big success. I think we'll continue on that path for the foreseeable future. But we do in our agency have a strategy session set up for later in the spring to discuss where we want to be as an agency to make sure that we continue to provide the most access we can, because as you can see from some of the cases I described, we serve a lot of vulnerable populations who are in dire need of the benefits or the licensing that is at risk with their dispute with the state. So that's what we've done over the past 2 years.
I just want to add that when I came on board July of 2020, our staff's foremost concern was for the vulnerable population who needed those assistance. And so they worked tirelessly to make that hearing available to those individuals.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. I know, even as we come out of, or hopefully come out of these different variants and folks are able to actually be in person, I wonder if you all are thinking along the lines of a policy change to maybe do that hybrid model, moving forward, or sounds like you are strategizing about what you think may work best. But I can tell you, I know I've worked with a lot of organizations outside of state government that are not going back in the office anytime soon and have started trying to do things a lot differently in terms of the way that they do work. And that hybrid model seems to work for a lot of organizations now. COVID taught us a lot, and that was one of the things that COVID taught us. And so I just, if that's something that you're thinking about, I just ask that you keep us up to date with where you are moving forward, because I think that is a model that you say you've got some really good success stories out of it. Maybe that's something that you might continue to do.
We definitely like the hybrid model, and as we go forward, we'll certainly consider that. The Administrative Procedure Act in Maryland does permit remote hearings, and our rules of procedure, which is part of COMAR, it also allows us to do remote hearings.
In fact, we made adjustments to our regulation in 2020, late 2020, to make it clearer so that all the stakeholders understand the options that they have. And we are always listening to our stakeholders to make sure that our hybrid system will reflect what the Maryland's needs, and so as to make sure we provide best service and best hearing possible for everyone involved.
Delegate Severo, I know you have your hand raised.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to take a moment and welcome Chief Judge Pak to my committee, my subcommittee. As the only member that represents Montgomery County, Chief Judge Pak has, not was, but is just one of those community leaders that has been absolutely phenomenal throughout his career in public service. So it is good to see you here, Judge Pak. I want to welcome you again to my subcommittee. and we certainly look forward to working with you and your office. And thank you for all you do, and welcome to your team.
Thank you. I look forward to working with every member of this committee, and anything we need to make changes to make it better, we are willing to do so. So thank you for your input, and thank you for giving me this opportunity.
Absolutely.
Always great to get those shout outs. If we can move on, I know there's a another issue that we were asking you to comment on, and that was the case processing times and the actions being taken.
Again, we submitted our response to that request for comment, but I think our Director of Operation, John Radick, and our Director of Quality Assurance, Harriet Helfand, can answer that question. John?
Thank you. And I'll deal with the two areas that showed the largest increases in processing time. They were Motor Vehicle Administration and Department of Human Services. Motor Vehicle Administration, we looked back at the data, and it turned out to be really just a temporary increase in processing time that we believe was totally due to COVID. So while I mentioned that we shifted over to WebEx to do those hearings, it did take us a while to purchase the equipment for all of our judges to operate from home and to shift our notices to WebEx notices to tell people where their hearing was going to be. So we were a little bit caught off guard when all of the MVAs overnight closed down. That's where we used to hold our hearings. But after that initial 2 months of a hiatus of MVA hearings, we're actually back on track to our regular processing time for MVA. And in fact, as Chief Judge Pak mentioned, no backlog on that. On the Department of Human Services, a lot of that was that the local departments of social services closed their offices. And so a lot of those cases had to be postponed. Or if the local department wasn't ready to proceed, or somebody had COVID or had a COVID exposure, again, it had to be postponed. We are back on track with our processing times for DHS cases as well. And as you see, that is the bulk of our caseload. MDH, MVA, and DHS make up about 80% of our cases. We are happy now that we're back in line with normal processing time. So we expect that number to show improvement in the next budget season. But let me turn it over to Harriet Helfand, because I'm sure there's something I missed in that response.
John, I actually think you covered it all, but I think a lot of it, does reflect the very rapid changes we had to make and how we had to accommodate all of the other agencies that we service. When their offices are closed and all of the constituents and all of the participants are used to going to those offices and then converting them to remote hearings, just took a lot of time and effort on the part of our IT staff, our judges. So, if there were lag times or postponements, they were only there. They only reflected the efforts that were being made to ensure that people would have their due process. So we really think that we've come to the point where we're on an even track now, where people are able to participate in their hearings, where we have many fewer postponements because people are used to the system. Our notices of hearing reflect exactly how those hearings are going to be conducted, and people have gotten to the point where they know that their needs are being accommodated. So I would answer it in that respect.
I just wanted to add that we have invested much of our resources so that we can move quickly to the virtual hearings. And as a result, unlike other agencies or even the courts, that we were able to catch up with our backlogs as of early this year. So we hope those processing time can be improved hopefully by the starting next fiscal year.
Great to hear that you are definitely on the right track. Appreciate it. Finally, if you can elaborate a little bit more on the hearing satisfaction rates. Now, for me, this is a little different because I would assume that most people would be unsatisfied with the result of the hearing. I guess that's not the case, or maybe more people are satisfied that they're getting their due process and things are happening in their direction. Because before you had that 87% satisfaction rate, which is a high, and then because of the last 2 years, things haven't been going in I guess folks' direction, and so they're not satisfied with you. I'm sure it's a lot more. It's a lot more to it than that. It's probably more complicated, but I would just assume that people don't normally win when they come to these cases, and they wouldn't be satisfied. But that doesn't sound like that's it. So you can just elaborate on that for us a little.
Normally, every proceeding involves two parties, and one of the parties will lose, and you would expect 50% or less will be satisfied with the outcome. But to my surprise, that the significant number of people are satisfied work done by all our administrative law judges. So I was impressed with it. Although there was a small decline, I think Harriet can explain that a little bit better. Harriet, would you elaborate on that?
I totally agree with Chief Judge Pak. You would expect, and Delegate Bridges, you would expect that at least half the people would be dissatisfied. So we're always very pleased that even the people who lose feel like it's been a fair process. And that's very gratifying to us because we believe our judges make an extraordinary effort to make sure that all of our participants are heard, that we understand, and even if it doesn't go their way, they believe that they've had a fair shake. We've thought about this while we have had this small decline, and I really do think it's just been the transition to these remote hearings. I mean, when you're used to coming to a location, being in front of a human being, having people there, and then you have to switch to technology, which was the best we could do at the time, but it's, as we all know, they're inevitable glitches. The internet doesn't work, or somebody fades off, or you're muted, or something like that. We've all been there. And I think for some people that's been frustrating. So we've tried very hard to address those frustrations. I've been thinking about this, and we use a lot of interpreters because we conduct in every language possible to be able to give people a fair hearing. And when you add an interpreter to a screen and the whole internet process, it's another layer. And I think, maybe that adds to a little bit of dissatisfaction that you can't hear somebody as clearly. But we think we're moving in the right direction. I think as we go forward, and whether or not we, all of the hearings that have been conducted virtually convert back to in-person hearings, or if we do go to hybrid hearings, I think we've learned a lot of lessons and in how to accommodate people where they are. So we're hoping that even though we're not displeased, that at least we've been able to maintain satisfaction, that we can even keep moving forward, so that as people get used to new processes and the way the world has changed, and I think for better or worse, irrevocably changed, that we're still able to give everybody due process and give them the ear that they need.
I also want to add that during these virtual hearings, we had initially a lot of mechanical glitches that had to be fixed, and we've been refining our virtual hearings over the years with a lot of experience between 2020 and 2021 with our outstanding IT director. So we hope even we continue this hybrid combination of in-person and virtual hearings, we hope that the satisfaction rating will be maintained or increase in the future.
Hey, you all must still be doing something well, because if I lose a case, you're all getting bad reviews. Sorry.
I just wanted to add one little thing that, we can keep track. We're in touch with the National Center for State Courts, and we received a poll that they conducted in 2021. And one of their reports was that public trust measures are at their lowest level since they started tracking confidence indicators. So, and this was shown to be true across all government institutions. So I really think that, the pandemic in its entirety has really tried people's patience. It's tried their souls. It's just really made an impression on people. And I think making them either wary, distrustful, or just a lack of confidence. So what we do try to do is increase that confidence level, that we are providing due process, that people feel like they are being heard, that we listen to them, and we are trying through every technical method possible to continue our delivering that due process through our hearings.
Looks like Ms. Dargan is trying to be heard as well.
I am. Thank you, Delegate Bridges. And this is my first budget hearing, and I'm having a blast. I'm just going to say that I'm having a great time getting to see sort of how the sausage is made. But I just wanted to speak directly to your point about, if I lose, everybody's getting a bad review. And one of the things that we have always emphasized with the Office of Administrative Hearings and the training of our administrative law judges, whether they're issuing a decision orally from the bench, like in an MVA hearing, or whether they're issuing a written decision like they would in a personnel hearing or a Consumer Protection Division case. One thing that we emphasize and that our judges take pride in is making sure that people understood that they were heard. So, for example, one of the things that we always talk about with new ALJ training and that we revisit in our monthly ALJ training is, no matter what the issue is, address it. Address it on the record, address it in your written decision, because that's the thing that shows people that you are actually listening. Like, even if somebody raises something and they only talk about it for, say, 3 minutes, and it's maybe 4 sentences, and then the hearing itself was 2 or 3 days long, but that was an issue that they raised, when they open that decision and see that discussion about it, or when they hear you make your oral argument after, say, a 3.5 hour involuntary admission hearing, and you actually talk about that thing that they may have only talked about briefly, but that was still an issue, that shows them that you were listening. And I think that a lot of times, if you think about customer service and your dissatisfaction with something that you bought or some sort of service that you're, when you can actually speak to a customer service representative and it feels like they listened to you, even if for some reason they're not able to actually give you the exact resolution that you want, if they can answer your questions, if they can explain why it happened that way, at the end of that conversation, you can think, well, I might still be unhappy with Target, but let me tell you, Tina was a great customer service rep, and that can have an impact on how you rate the business because the customer service was there. So I think that's how our judges approach it, is we take pride in letting people know when we render our decisions that we heard them, that we heard their arguments, even if we didn't find the argument persuasive, even if we found the other side's argument more persuasive, we still heard you. And I think that that's what accounts for us having that, even now in 2021, those above 85% satisfaction ratings. I think that's a big part of it, is making people truly feel like they were heard.
Dargan, I definitely heard you. That makes a lot of sense. I definitely appreciate it. Delegate Acevedo.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate that, Judge Dargan. I'm just going to say I'm with Chair Bridges. If I lose, you're getting a bad review. But a quick question to Mr. Ledig about just the e-Defender system. With that rollout, does that now mean that that folks can, in essence, file online versus, I guess, in person?
Let my IT director answer that. Targ? Before before Tag answered, I just want to mention that the e-filing committee was formed. We brought in every part of our office, that the different divisions, so they have all inputs and required functionalities. And Tag Ibrahim chaired that committee and come up with the cost-effective, compatible, and have required functionalities by all our employees. That the committee came up with the what they thought was the best system that can be incorporated into our case management system at OAH. Todd?
Yes, thank you for the question, Delegate. I'm currently, OAH currently accepts requests for hearings via mail or walk-in, which we're trying to change in order to expand the ability for the citizens of Maryland to file their requests online. That's the driving factor to increase that accessibility for the citizens to be able to do that, while not taking away the ability for them to file via mail or walk-in in case they don't have the technology to do that from their home or office or library or wherever there's internet access.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I recognize that broadband would have been, it's a challenge for some folks, but I would also imagine you all would have to balance that given the times that we're in with, folks coming in and filing in person versus online electronically. So that's good to know. So yes, thank you. Appreciate that.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
Are there any other questions from the members?
Thanks again, Chief Judge Park and his team. Appreciate it.
Since we're also giving shout outs, I just want to recognize, I know you have Dinara Haval on here as well, a good friend of mine. So I just wanted to say hello and give her a shout out as well. All right, Chief Judge Park, anything else you want to say before we end this hearing?
We are trying to make our system much more accessible to everyone. So even our hybrid hearings, they are that the parties can always request if it's arranged as remote hearings, they can ask for in-person hearing because they don't have access to, let's say, a computer and they were to ask. And same is true for the in-person hearings under current environment. If parties jointly request remote hearing, or the one of the parties provides good cost for remote hearing, which could include COVID situation, that those are provided by our judges. So people have access to hearings either remotely or in person. Depends on their needs. So we try to be flexible as possible and try to make it accessible as possible. And we are trying to listen to everyone and to make sure that we provide the best service possible.
Very much. Sounds like you're doing a good job and you're definitely listening from what I can tell. So I appreciate you all being here. I don't believe we have anyone from the public signed up to speak. And if that is the case, we will now end the hearing for the Office of Administrative Hearings. Thank you all very much for being here.
Thank you, Chairman Bridges.
Now we'll move on to the Office of the State Prosecutor. Caleb, Mr. Weiss, if you can give us your analysis.
Certainly. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen again. Can everyone see the document? Here on the first page, we have the operating budget summary. The fiscal 2023 allowance includes an increase of $62,000 or 3.5%, which brings the total budget to $1.8 million. Here in Exhibit 1, we have an overview of the agency spending. As you can see, similar to past years, 85% of spending is devoted to personnel, with supplies and IT expenses being the next largest at 9%, and then all other expenses at 6%. On Exhibit 2, we have the change in the agency budget. As you can see in the top portion here, you have the personnel changes. The one non-personnel change that I'd like to highlight is the $25,000 for the new case management system. This should be the remainder of the funds necessary to complete this system. And this is something that in the past has been mentioned as a priority by Office of the State Prosecutor. Here under key observations, before we get to the Exhibit 3, we ask that OSP, should comment on its work on the investigation of police misconduct and how this work overlaps with the work of the Office of the Attorney General's Independent Investigation Division, which is the new division established by legislation within the Office of the Attorney General. Moving on to Exhibit 3. As you can see here, this is the number of related to corruption cases. In fiscal 2021, you can see that the number of complaints has increased fairly dramatically, as well as the investigations opened, cases closed, and the number of cases charged. Exhibit 4 relates to election law cases. As you can see here in fiscal 2021, the number of referrals taken has also increased. However, the number of enforcement actions taken has decreased by about half over the prior year, while the conviction rate has maintained steady at 100%. We are asking that OSP should comment on the increase in referrals and complaints and the resulting impact on its personnel needs going forward. And then for the actions, DLS recommends concurring with the governor's allowance. And with that, I end my presentation. I'm happy to take any questions the committee has.
Mr. Weiss, great job. Does do any of the members have any questions for Mr. Weiss? Seeing none, I think we will now move on to the Office of the State Prosecutor. Mr. Howard, good to see you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. As mentioned, my name is Chuck Howard. I'm the Maryland State Prosecutor, and I appreciate the opportunity to talk with you all today about the important work of our office. I'd like to thank Caleb Weiss for his superb engagement with our office and very thoughtful comments during the process, which is, you always derive a bit of that just from the process of going through the analysis. So I really appreciate that. As you all are probably aware, the Office of the State Prosecutor has jurisdiction over a number of specific crimes, but our primary focus is really on public corruption and election law violations. This year, despite the challenges presented by the pandemic to our investigative and prosecutorial efforts, our office has seen a record increase in cases referred to us and complaints received, but we've also been able to successfully charge several corruption cases throughout the state of Maryland. Some that you may have seen in the press include, for example, the former director of the Maryland Environmental Service and chief of staff to the governor for misconduct in office, felony theft, and other offenses, and the mayor of Cambridge, Maryland, for revenge porn violations. We've also charged and convicted the deputy director of the Cecil County Board of Elections and the mayor of the city of Glen Arden for misconduct in office. Notably, and I think those cases demonstrate that our office is truly a statewide office as you look about the geographic diversity of the cases we address. Notably this year, we've had a significant rise in the number of allegations related to police misconduct specifically, as well as prosecutorial misconduct as a subset of overall public official misconduct. As an example, you may have seen in the press that we have charged a former Baltimore City prosecutor while as a prosecutor stalking ex-girlfriends using grand jury subpoenas, among other crimes. And we've charged a police officer in Prince George's County for kidnapping and the illegal use of force under the color of his office. In addition, we charged and convicted 8 correctional officers for a theft scheme involving over $400,000 in state funds. I note that all individuals charged are presumed innocent, but I think these cases highlight the individual work of our office, striving to ensure continued trust in our government institutions throughout the state of Maryland. Obviously, I can't discuss any cases that have not been charged, but our numbers this year, as Mr. Weiss indicated in his analysis, have shown a massive increase, particularly a 71% increase in corruption and police misconduct complaints received by our office over the past 2 years. In addition, of course, to corruption cases, our office handles all election law violations throughout the state. One attorney in our office handles over 500 referrals from the State Board of Elections each year, in addition to handling a caseload of corruption cases and other election law investigations and prosecutions throughout the year. The variety and complexity of the cases we prosecute would make it appear that we have more than the personnel we do. We have 4 prosecutors, including myself, and 7 investigators charged with this statewide jurisdiction. While our resources are limited, through hard work, we have been able, in my belief, to accomplish our important mission. We appreciate the governor's allowance in our budget and concur with that allowance. Thank you so much for your attention and your support of our office. We have provided written testimony to address specifically the questions that were asked about our structure and provide some more information about our future goals. But I welcome any questions at this time, and that myself or our Deputy State Prosecutor, Sarah David, and our Office Administrator, Jeannie Gunther, who are with us today, can address. So thank you.
Thank you very much. I very much appreciate it. Remind me again how many people you have in your office.
We have a whopping number of 14, Mr. Chairman.
14.
14, and I'm it's a small team, but I'm very proud of our team. And indeed, we made some significant, in the 2 years that I've been there, I think we've made some significant progress in both the diversification of our workforce to ensure that we have a true representation of the population of Maryland, as well as in the individual quality of the members that we have in our team. I would put our prosecutors up against anyone. And as a former investigator myself, I believe that all of our current investigators are better than I was in my heyday. So I'm very proud to be in charge of that particular organization.
Saying a lot. Delegate Acevedo.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. State Prosecutor Howard, welcome, and welcome to your team. Good to see you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Delegates.
Let me just say that you all certainly punch well above your weight, given the size of your office and the responsibilities of your office. So, one of the questions that I'll ask that, I certainly ask of certain agencies that, oftentimes have such responsibilities, but such a relatively small staff, right? Dedicated and great staff, no doubt. But does your office have the resources in order to carry out the functions that you just mentioned, the responsibilities, right? Which is very important, right? And you laid out just some of those successes of your office, and I appreciate that, right? But do you all have the resources that you all need, right, in order to carry out your function?
I thank you, Delegate Acevedo. That's a great question. And my instincts as a government bureaucrat is always to say, yes, you need more resources. But
right.
Let me try to give you a more erudite answer to that particular question. And then I'd invite our my deputy to weigh in on this, because I think she has some strong feelings in that particular regard. I've always been believed you don't go to the well until you have a demonstrated rationale for why you need the resources. When I took over in the office and saw what we were able to do with very modest means, realized that we could turn those modest means into a more efficient organization, but that the future undoubtedly would require us to look for more resources. We did various things like having an online website complaint portal, because I was worried that we weren't getting the true input from the Maryland population as a whole. I would get referrals through various agencies, but any citizen of Maryland should be able to make a referral or complaint to our office. That's one of the reasons our numbers have increased, but we've gotten some very good cases out of that. Now demonstrating what we've had to do with pretty much the same number of people over the last 2 years with a caseload that's increased fairly exponentially, and a rise in certain types of cases, as I mentioned, police misconduct, prosecutorial misconduct, abuses of power that are very, I think, absolutely should be addressed, and absolutely oftentimes need to be addressed by an independent agency that's not embedded with local, in the context of local organizations that can take an independent view, a disparate view, and approach it. We'll look down the road towards us needing additional resources. But I would really like to invite my Deputy State Prosecutor, Ms. Sarah David, to comment on that as well.
Thank you so much, and thank you guys so much for your attention in this hearing. And I'd like to kind of thank you, Delegate Acevedo, for that question, in the sense that it's not just a numbers issue when you're dealing with statewide jurisdiction and jurisdiction of victims of corruption, because a lack of diversity on our staff changes the way that we can engage as we look to what those victims look like. And I'd like to credit Mr. Howard for vastly increasing our diversity in leadership when it comes to race, when it comes to gender, and ensuring that when victims of misconduct that involve sexual violence and offenses, that there are female prosecutors and investigators that they can speak to. When we have victims of misconduct that relate to racial insensitivity by police officers, that we have individuals that can meet with them, that can have that diversity of perspective to understand the nature of that complaint. So I think that another importance in kind of what we're looking to going forward is ensuring that our agency can be representative of the geographic diversity, as well as the racial and gender-based diversity and other aspects of diversity that reflect the cases that we have to evaluate, because how we evaluate those cases does always come from the implicit biases and life experiences that we have. And so with that, I see that the delegate has a follow-up, so I'll allow him that before continuing.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And thank you for touching on the diversity piece, because, that is certainly one of the questions that I have of all agencies, and no different for the state prosecutor's office, especially when we're looking at the demographics. So, I'd very much be interested in finding out what the state prosecutor is doing in terms of diversity, not just now, but long term. But I'll get to my other question and wrap up, which is which relates to what a good bit of you all mentioned earlier. I was one of the advocates on the House Work Group on Police Accountability for the state prosecutor's office having the responsibility, or the jurisdiction, if you will, to handle or prosecute, police misconduct. And part of that reason is because of, the Anton Black case and the prosecution that took place with the former police chief of Greensboro, and just really the track record of the state prosecutor's office, right? I also recognize that, of the legislation that we passed, we have certainly given you all more responsibilities, and in terms of this overall debate. And I'm curious as to how your office is sort of preparing and dealing with the legislation that we pass, quite significant. How you all are obviously dealing with those complaints. I understand we are still, a year in, if that. But if you all could just comment on that, obviously I'd be interested, and I'll be following this as we go forward. But I'm interested in how things are right now, considering that legislation passed. We know that has implications for your office. And then again, coming back to the budget question, because this is why I asked that question earlier, you all have increased responsibilities now. And I certainly have faith in the state prosecutor's office, but my faith in you all has not diminished. My faith in agencies operating does when, they don't have sufficient funding. Do you understand what I'm saying? So if y'all could just speak to that, I'd appreciate it.
Absolutely. Well, if you don't mind, I'll take a crack at it first, Delegate Acevedo, and then let Sarah weigh in. To answer, just to address the diversity piece, we do have a plan We've made, as we've said, significant gains in diversity hiring, both in the prosecutor, investigative, and professional staff areas of our very small office. So I think we're doing well, but it's not something you just rest on your laurels. And you look at not just for today's prosecutor and investigator, but for tomorrow's prosecutor and investigators. So that makes us trying to expand our aperture for our interns and our law clerks, people to interest them in a prosecutorial career, to familiarize them with the work that our office does, and to look for developing future talent that can come to our offices. So approaching HBCUs, looking at various diverse organizations in the two law schools here in Maryland, with University of Baltimore and University of Maryland. I put aside my prejudice as a University of Maryland graduate. I do consider University of Baltimore as well. We try to get lawyers from both institutions and law students from both institutions here, but to look from a diverse plan. So we do have a plan moving forward, but we're certainly always open to suggestions and insights, because we don't believe I don't think anyone has the perfect plan. I think you have to adjust and move forward. But I'm very proud of the accomplishments we've made in the span of time that I've been here to diversify our workforce at our office, because what Sarah says is absolutely on point. A lot of times you don't, how you start the investigation is how you finish the trial. And if you don't start well, and you don't have a capable, empathetic outreach to victims, you don't have people who can represent a diversity of viewpoints to look at it and place incidents in context, to ensure that our office is not being used to be weaponized by one side versus another in a local political squabble, but to ensure that we are looking at things through broad a lens as possible and a valid legal analysis to move us forward. So we're doing that. As far to address the second part of your question, as far as the state's independent investigations unit with the Attorney General's office, which is now investigating the police shootings. As you're aware, we had volunteered to host that function within our office, and the legislature decided to move to have that at the Attorney General's office, and that's fine. That unit though is from what I see, they're doing fine, but they haven't published reports, so I can't really comment on any final results coming out of that office. I have made ourselves available during the stand-up of that office to the new chief of that unit, to the Attorney General's office, to give them our best business practices. We provided, met with them, provided them oversights from both our IT functions to our business processes, to try to posture them as best we can from our little bit for success in that area. But I think it's important to realize there's two major differences between that office and our office overall as it stands now. One is that office investigates use of force or incidents that result in the death of someone in police custody or due to police action. And those are very important cases, but that's only the tip of the iceberg when it comes to police misconduct. And indeed, if you don't address the base of the iceberg on police misconduct, unfortunately, it may grow into some of those more extreme cases. There's still a vast range of police and official misconduct by police agencies, correctional agencies that need to be addressed and would fall under our jurisdiction. We still, because we have jurisdiction over over public official misconduct, certainly if a police officer killed somebody illegally, then that would be misconduct, and we could have jurisdiction to investigate and prosecute that. Right now, we would not investigate it because that's up to the Attorney General's office, and we don't want to interfere with their process. But we could, down the road, pose a potential prosecution venue for them. If they present their report to a local state's attorney, that state's attorney declines to prosecute, they could always refer that case to us, and then we could move forward and prosecute because we have the jurisdiction. Right now, as I think the statistics show, we have plenty to do with the resources we have with other forms of police misconduct. So there hasn't been a true overlap or interference between our offices, and I'm proud of the fact that we have great dialogue between the Attorney General's unit, as we have with the overall AG's office and our office, to share information, to try to make both of us have important missions and try to make sure that that's successful. Sarah, did you want to add anything to that?
Just to piggyback briefly onto the second aspect of your question, Delegate Acevedo, and due to the legislature's hard work in kind of expanding, I would say the public nature of some of the police misconduct, our office is working very hard to prepare for how we're going to address the influx of those cases. And when cases are not necessarily being handled administratively, and when they do need to be prosecuted, we'll be prosecuting those cases. Our attorneys are very well versed in the nuance of police misconduct cases. And sometimes it's not a question of trying those cases, as Mr. Howard alluded to, it's a question of advising and helping with best practices for our local partners, who many of whom also do an outstanding job on a lot of cases involving police misconduct. In looking kind of at the future of this committee, you'll see our conviction rate go down. It's hard in some of these jurisdictions to take on these trials, but that's not going to dissuade us from doing it. We're working very hard to ensure that transparency and accountability in police misconduct, as well as in our corruption cases, is a priority. And so that's sort of how we're preparing to address some of the reforms that the legislature has instituted. And I think that that's what you'll be seeing from us in the future and going forward.
Ms. David, Mr. Howard, appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Delegate Acevedo. But just as one last caveat, when I show up next year and start asking for more money, you'll be the first one I'll talk
to. He opened the door, right? Thank you, Delegate Acevedo.
Bring the stats.
Does anybody else have any more questions? If not, I want to thank Director Howard and Ms. David and Ms. Guthrup as well for being here. And we appreciate you and your follow-up from everything that was mentioned in the analysis. If there are no more questions, I do not believe we have any public testimony or anyone scheduled to speak from the public. If not, that will end the hearing of the Office of the State Prosecutor, and that'll end our hearings for today. Want you all to have a safe and healthy rest of the evening. Get something to eat. I know I haven't eaten since early this morning, and we'll be right back to it again tomorrow. So thank you all and have a good evening.